Welcome to the Westward Expansion Museum. Join us on our journey through America. We will be starting our journey today on the East Coast in New York, which was the main port for immigrants as they sailed in on ships from Europe. Immigrants of all different nationalities came to America through Ellis Island. Most of them continued to New York, where many of them would start their new lives in America. Many immigrants, like the one pictured, liked the United States for numerous reasons. They were happy with the government because poverty was almost non-existent, every man's vote or opinion counted in politics, and traveling everywhere was easy even if you didn't have a passport. When they first arrived in New York, many immigrants would either buy some sort of property and start it off if they had money, but in many cases they would start working for American business owners almost immediately. Once they had built up a substantial sum of money, they would then decide either to stay in the city or go find a bigger plot of land which they could call their own. Immigrants would then go out into surrounding states in search of amount of land that they could purchase. Land was cheap, so they usually bought a good amount of land without having to spend too much. Land was sold at $1.25 per acre, so they could buy a substantial amount of land and plant it with crops such as corn, wheat, and potatoes. After a few years of growing and selling these crops, the immigrants would have made enough profit to where they could have enough money to move themselves and their families somewhere else. Once families made enough profit to move, they would move west, out into the more unpopulated land where they could have first dibs on good land that was still uncivilized. Particularly, many Norwegians went to Illinois. Why Illinois, you ask? Well, Illinois was still mostly empty, unclear land. The soil and climate were perfect for growing bountiful crops. The land was cheap, still at $1.25 per acre, and the reason why a lot of Norwegians went to claim the land was because they wanted to stick together because they knew each other very well. Now we are going to draw our attention to the Mississippi River. This river was big and easily accessible, which was good for trading and transportation. The Mississippi River was traveled using boats, of course, particularly steamboats. They were used to transport goods and food to different cities, and they would also transport people, whether they were tourists visiting the country or immigrants moving inland trying to find a place they could call home. Oftentimes, while people were traveling the river in a steamboat, they would often spot squatters. Squatters were people who lived in swampy areas of the river. They were often looked upon as sallow, sickly-looking sorts of miserable beings. Most squatters came to the swamps in search of unclaimed land, and they cut down trees to use their timbers for cabins, rafts, and trading. They hunted bears and other wildlife. Even though life was hard at first for squatters, they eventually became stronger and were more successful when they built rafts to trade with steamboats. Even though they were often looked down upon, they were actually happy and successful. Those who did not settle along the Mississippi continued west in search of land on routes such as the Oregon Trail. The most common way to travel the Oregon Trail was by wagon train. These wagon trains were about 120 wagons long with as many as 1,000 people traveling with them. The schedule for a wagon train was basically travel during the day and rest at night. While the train was moving, men would hunt buffalo, which was their main food source. No part of the animal was wasted, even if part of it was just fueled for the fire. The men also kept watch over the herds of cows and horses that they brought along with them. After many months or even years, the wagon train would eventually reach the Oregon Territory, which was present-day Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. This territory was shared by the U.S. and Great Britain. There was tension in government about who should actually own the land, but in the territory, the settlers were at peace with each other. After the Oregon Territory was populated for a while, settlers started moving out into other areas beyond the Oregon Trail. This concludes our journey through America. Thank you for joining us and enjoy your visit.